Thank you, Corey. And thank you all for coming. My name is Connor Kreutz. I am one of the co-presidents of the BYU FSSO. And today I'm joined by some really awesome students who all spent the summer working with the State Department. So we have Stephen Benschneider. He served in the Diplomatic Security Office in Puerto Rico. Miranda Hatch was at the U.S. Embassy in Panama. Susan Duncan was at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. And Chelsea Johnson was at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, South Korea. And I was at the U.S. Consulate in Leipzig, Germany. And we are here today to help you get to where we were this summer. BYU has a really, really great legacy of sending interns to the State Department. And the State Department loves BYU interns. So for many reasons, including that you guys have clean slates and it's easy for you to get a security clearance. And some of the interns may speak to that later. So the way this is going to work is we have 5 short presentations. Each will be about 10 to 12 minutes long. And then after about an hour of presenting, we'll have 15 to 20 minutes of time for you to ask specific questions. And that can be anything from how do I build a strong application to how do I prepare myself, what are maybe more about our experiences. And then after that, there's chip cookies in the back, and we'd love to just chat with you. You can come up and talk to us, ask more questions. So without further ado, we'll start with Chelsea, who will tell us about her experience in South Korea.
Thank you, Connor. Am I pressing the right button? Am I aiming at the right thing? Ah! Okay. Really? Okay. I'll keep that in mind. Okay. As Connor said, I'm Chelsea Johnson. I interned in South Korea kind of before everything exploded. So this is diplomacy and me in South Korea. And so my goal in doing this is to kind of give you a quick overview and then perhaps spark some more pointed questions that you can ask us later. So me, and why I applied. I was an undergrad here at BYU. I graduated in 2012 with my degree in fax ed. And no, that's not learning how to use a fax machine. I've been asked that. It's Family Consumer Science home ec, which I think is really interesting because you can literally come from anywhere and you have something to contribute to the Foreign Service. And then I graduated. I served my mission in Chicago, so hearing that our guest speakers from Chicago made me very happy. And then I was a K-8 teacher for 2 years in Las Vegas, which gave me some interesting experiences that I was later able to use in the Foreign Service. So use your experience. Even though it might be limited now, use it. Currently, I'm a graduate student in the MPA program. It's public administration. It's like the MBAs, but for the public sector, so not nonprofits, government, federal. This lower section is why I applied. So when I graduated with my undergrad, there was an article in the BYU Alumni magazine talking about BYU alumni in the Foreign Service, and I read it, and I was like, I must do that. And then I left on my mission 2 weeks later. So it was kind of weird timing. But then certain things in my patriarchal blessing also led to that. And I'm very interested in culture and language, and so just going out and experiencing and really engaging with people of those cultures to make a better world for everyone. I'm definitely in the save the world sphere. My motivation is world peace. And I always feel like I'm in a beauty pageant when I say that, but I mean it. And this was also, I had never been out of the country before this internship, so this was my test run. It's like, can I handle not living in America? The answer is yes. Okay. So my application process, my first tip would be stay on top of the deadlines. There's someone who's in my program that was also interested in the Foreign Service, and I was like, oh, I just put in my application. He's like, there's an application? What? And you totally missed the deadline. And so pay attention to deadlines, get things in early, be on top of it. For me, I went to the career fair last year, and there was a Foreign Service officer there. She had her own booth, and I talked with her one-on-one, and I actually gave her my essay for the application and said, Like, this is my experience, this is what I would like, help me make it better. And she like totally changed it and made it sound a lot better of a pitch. So that kind of ties into the next one. If you can't go to a career fair or something like that, contact the diplomat in residence. It's coming, is it next week? Soon?
The deadline?
The diplomat in residence.
Oh. I'm not sure.
2 weeks. Okay, go to that. Meet him, talk to him, make that contact. That's what he's here for. And then kind of like we were saying with clearance material, I got mine in really fast, and this ties with keep an open mind. I got the email that said, you aren't our first choice, you're our second choice. So if something falls through with the first person, then you can have the internship. And I was like, well, that means I don't have it. But I kept an open mind, and like a month later, they called me direct and said, the first person's security clearance isn't coming through, you're on deck. I was like, oh, okay. So get that clearance stuff in quick, because it can mean having an internship and not having an internship. Quick lessons learned. There's a place for every skill set. You have something to contribute. There's many opportunities to learn and grow if you take them. Quick story, I was actually in the consular section, and I realized that I was actually a lot more interested in the management section. And so just talking with the officers that worked in both sections that were really good friends, the management section was like, they were supposed to have 3 interns, but none of them showed up, and so they were like, they couldn't get anything done because it was all backlogging. And I was like, hey, I could come help you. So network, get your interests in, learn the things you want to learn, and also come in knowing what you want to learn. I got there and they're like, so what project do you want to do? And I was like, I get to choose? I was like, this is just a privilege for me being here. So come in knowing what you want to learn. Come in knowing what projects you want to work on, certain topics. Network, get the experience you want. Ask for help, don't be afraid. There are a lot of like short-term interns that came in after me, and they would just sit at their desk when they finished whatever they were given, and they're just like, okay, what do I do now? And you just ask for help, ask for stuff to do, get that experience. I lined up my Foreign Service Officer test with my internship, so I was like, hey, I'm taking the Foreign Service Officer test, and they're like, oh, let me give you all of my study materials and everything that I did, and they want you to succeed. So if you can, line up your testing time with when you're in your internship, because then I got onto the personal narratives, and I would write them and give them to an officer, and they would edit them. And so it's a good networking thing. And then, funny story, tell security if you are going to travel out of the country. I went to China to visit my parents, and I thought it was okay, and I was checking out for my internship, and they're like, oh, you're supposed to have like a security briefing because the Chinese hack your phones and stuff. And I was like, oops. So tell security if you are going to travel. Quick highlights. I got there and something happened with North Korea, and my parents were immediately like, are you alive? And so I was with my I want to say commanding officer. My supervisor. I was with my supervisor, and I was like, so North Korea? And he was like, meh, nobody cares. Like, nobody's concerned. And I was like, okay, I could do that too. Once I got into management, I was able to, Obama came to the country for some presentation at a university. I was able to meet him. I was in customs and shipping, so we dealt with his suitcases, everything. We got him on his private chartered plane, so we were on the tarmac when he got on the plane. It was really cool experiences. There was a big 4th of July celebration that I was able to be a part of. It was interesting because I was in charge of the line for letting people in, and there was a VIP line and a regular people line, and some diplomats didn't get VIP invitations, and they were really upset. So I got to practice my diplomacy skills. But yeah, that was just exciting. It's a lot of paperwork, especially in consular. That was all I did. I just like put in numbers because I wasn't authorized to actually interview the people. I watched other people interview them, but it's a lot of paperwork, so be prepared. And then murders and fraud. I'm sure all of your eyes went there first. Consular, the reason I was not as interested in consular anymore is because some of those interviews are super intense. They're like, oh, I see you've murdered someone. on a U.S. Army base, and you are still working for the U.S. Army. Okay, tell me about that. And yeah, those things get really intense, so you gotta have thick skin to get through that. And I could have done it, but I was just like, I wouldn't be as happy. And then Korea is an interesting place. This picture is the mall right outside the U.S. Embassy, and it's like the Washington Mall where it's just this big open space. And many days we were let out early because this is where everyone protested. Like this entire mall was filled with protesters. And it wasn't like American protests where people are punching people and stuff. They just sit there and they play really loud music. It's really hard to work. But it's an interesting thing about Korea. Just like lots of peaceful protests. And I was like, I don't know how they manage it, but that's an interesting thing. I think that's it. Yaha. Okay, so hopefully that sparked some questions, got you excited and not scared. And we'll move to Susan. Stephen.
All right, guys. So I'm Stefan Benschneider. That's a little bit difficult, both a first and last name, but it's not too bad. You get used to it. So I'm a little bit different than everybody else. I was not in an actual embassy. I was with the Diplomatic Security Service in Puerto Rico, so technically speaking, I wasn't even abroad either. So they don't send interns for kind of obvious security reasons to some of those abroad places because of the nature of the work that they do. So I was in Puerto Rico, which with the diplomatic security, when they're here stateside, they're doing more investigations, more immigration stuff, as far as like passport and visa fraud, trying to keep terrorists out and trying to keep people from taking advantage of those systems and creating false documents, those sorts of things. So a little bit about me before I get too into it. I started BYU here really interested in federal law enforcement. It was always my career plan, and I never really knew anything about the Foreign Service until I started trying to start a group with BYUSA. That didn't really work, not a lot of resources over there, until I kind of got referred over to some of the people here with the FSSO. They wanted me to come on as kind of their federal law enforcement person, and that's where I learned about diplomatic security and the opportunities that are there. And so the rest is kind of history, but let me tell you a little bit about what I did with diplomatic security. So a little bit different, obviously, than working in an embassy. Again, it's more investigations and things. So I sat on interviews with different people that they were bringing in to talk about passport and visa fraud. You know, people who had their passports taken and their identity stolen. People are now using those things to, you know, fly and do different things, which is very important because, a little fun fact for you, put things in perspective. Since Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, everybody there is citizens, right? And they have all the documentation and the things that a normal citizen would have. And it makes it a target because a lot of people will go there specifically to stay and get some of those documents because it's rather easy to get some of those things there. You can basically just go in and say that you were born and your parents did not give you a birth certificate and get a new one in your name or in a new name that you can then use to kind of fly under the radar if you're a criminal or do things you know, of a nefarious nature. So they're working to prevent those things. Puerto Rico is responsible for 30% of the passport and visa fraud. Right, so it's a small little island, 3.5 million people. To put it in perspective, Texas, which is on the border with Mexico, is responsible for 28%, and they have, I think, upwards of 35 million people there. So that kind of tells you how big of a problem that is. And so I work on that a lot there. I did a lot of different things, went to a lot of different court sessions to see kind of these immigration proceedings and stopping people from using other people's identities. There's one really interesting one where a lady had been using another lady's identity for 30 years and had destroyed her credit, had done all these different things, and we believe that that lady didn't, like her family, her children, everybody, thought that's what her real name was. but that wasn't actually the case. So if you can imagine having your parents tell you, oh, actually my name isn't this, it's actually that, and I came here, forever ago. So really, really interesting, some of those things. I got to sit in on a lot of really cool meetings with other federal law enforcement agencies and kind of see how they all work together to, accomplish their objectives. So a couple fun pictures I have. This is actually in the governor's mansion. It was the very first fort built there in the 1500s. So this thing is really old. It was a really great meeting, though. This meeting was intended to help the new government there address the problem with the documents, which are too easy to obtain, as I had already mentioned. And so it was kind of a diplomatic thing, trying to nudge them into spending more money and putting more effort into fraud prevention and these things, because all the victims are in Puerto Rico, but the people use those documents to gain access to the United States, to traffic drugs or people, or sometimes they just want a better life. And so it's in both parties' interest to protect the integrity of U.S. passports and visas. So that was a very cool meeting. We got a private tour. A lot of history in that place. Again, since it was built in the 1500s, it was the first fort, and then they later made it into the governor's mansion. Very cool. So some of the other fun random things I got to do. To this day, I volunteered to help remove a bulletproof window or windshield from the only armored car in Puerto Rico. And so that was fun. And I saw that stuff in the back, and I decided that it would be fun. Quick photo op, little intern moment. But it was really awesome. I mean, you can see that's an armored door there in my left hand. So it was really cool to see some of that, because these agents are based here, in the United States. They're part of the Foreign Service, so they're constantly going around the world. But while they're here, they're constantly being pulled to be sent to, Saudi Arabia to do a detail for 30 days, or to, New York right now for all the diplomatic things happening there. They're constantly being sent all around the world. And so it was really, really cool to rub shoulders with these people who've been, to amazing places, done amazing things, been with amazing people, a really interesting and great career. If you're interested in the Foreign Service and at all, in security, national security, intelligence, or law enforcement in any way, this is kind of the cream of the crop. This is the dream career, which, I was hesitant at first about this. I never had the idea of traveling abroad for, my entire career. And this internship definitely changed my mind about that. I did have some fun while I was there. I was in Puerto Rico and the Caribbean, so a lot of my friends make fun of me that it wasn't actually an internship, but it definitely was. There was a lot of professional things happening, but a lot of great opportunities to do stuff with the YSAs. Before I go over time, let me tell you some of my advice for you. You're all going to be in, different times: sophomore, junior, seniors, freshmen. So I approached my schooling a little bit differently. There's that phrase, I can't remember who said it, but don't let school get in the way of your education. You should be working on your resumes now. It's not easy to get a diplomatic or a State Department internship. You should be taking every opportunity you can now and seeking out every opportunity that you can to build a resume to have that. They're not going to take somebody who just has a 4.0 GPA. GPAs are good and important, but not that important. You need to have a good enough GPA, but you need to have the experience. You need to be the one that jumps out. And I did that through previous internships. I started with West Valley Police Department here in Salt Lake between my freshman and sophomore year. I didn't even get credit for that. It was just, I just did it because I wanted the experience. That then helped me get with the IRS, which I expected to be the worst internship ever, but it was actually the best. I learned a ton of things. I extended it to 6 months. It was a great opportunity. I learned a lot. And that, again, helped me get my next internship, which was actually paid with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Again, another great opportunity, another great learning experience that helped me figure out what I want to do and also build my resume for the next thing, which was my State Department internship. Take every opportunity you can to build your resume. Try and find relevant work to what you want to do now. Take a semester off to do an internship. Do whatever you need to do to build your resume. Be the person that looks competitive. Be the person that looks good coming out of school, not having to come out and then start building your resume. Use the resources that you have here. BYU Bridge has a lot of stuff, like Take a Cougar to Lunch. Over the years, I've spoken with many FBI agents and people from other agencies, and just been figuring out what I want to do. Rubbing shoulders with the right people is great. Networking is good. It's not going to get you a job by networking, maybe like the private sector, because everybody has to do the same application in the government. But it's really helped me figure out that this is where I want to be. It was kind of a long path to get here, but I'm grateful for every little thing that I did to get to this internship, which, again, validated all of my desires to serve abroad and to make my difference and save the world in my own way. And that was my internship. Thanks for your time, guys.
Hi, my name is Susan Duncan, and I went to the Paris Embassy in France, and it was the best internship of my life, and I'm really excited to tell you guys about it and to be able to inspire you guys to go abroad and to get a State Department internship like we did. So I want to talk a little bit about myself, about how my past influenced where I am today. So if you can see in this first picture, I grew up in DC, so I was surrounded by the government a lot. My dad, he worked in the Pentagon, and so from an early age, I had this desire to work in the government in some sort of way. And then when I was 15, I was lucky enough to go to Paris and go to France and visit a couple of cities in France. And when you go abroad, that's when you get really, you fall in love with the culture, the people, the language. So when I went to France at 15, that's when I knew I wanted to do something with the French language skill that I have. And so I even remember we were on this little bus tour at Paris real quick. We were just seeing all the grand monuments in Paris. And I remember seeing the Paris Embassy, and I thought, I want to work there one day. I don't know how, but I want to work there. And so luckily, I was able to get a job there. Also, while at BYU, I met a guy, and I knew I wanted to do an internship at the embassy. So I was really fortunate to be able to have someone that wanted to wait for me and wanted me to pursue my dreams of working in Paris. So here's what my process was like. I applied in May in 2016, and then it wasn't until August where I received a phone call from HR in the Paris Embassy that I was selected for the job. In order to be fully selected, you have to have your security clearance. Without the security clearance, you can't work in the embassy. So I was told that in August. And then the security clearance didn't open up until October of 2016. And so I had to wait until October. And then once it came out, the next day I turned it in because I wanted to get my security clearance in as fast as I could so that I could be able to start planning and be able to leave on time. And so it wasn't until December that I was told that I was able to go work in January at the embassy. So when I talked to the HR representative, they said that I had to find my own housing, I had to find my own flights there and everything. So that's a little bit intimidating when you don't have your security clearance. And so what I did was I used the Kennedy Center ISP office. And if you do a State Department internship, I highly recommend that you do it with the Kennedy Center. Because with this France internship program, I was able to have assistance to find housing, and they were able to give me extra scholarships to be able to pay for the airplane flights, to the flights to Paris. And so once I got my security clearance, I was all ready to go. So it was less stressful. So talk to the ISP office, to Christopher Quinlan, when you want to be able to work with BYU to get help. So I worked at the Paris Embassy, but in my section, I was in the GSO, which means that I was in a different building than the embassy most of the time. But I was able to go into the embassy for when I had meetings. But where I worked was in the George Marshall Center, which is in an 18th century Paris mansion. And the George Marshall Center is the official event venue for the Paris Embassy. So this is a picture of my bosses and I. On the left is my main supervisor, her name is Robin, and on the right is my other boss, Chantal, who worked in the embassy, and she was one of the head photographers. And so with Chantal, I was able to go into the embassy and help her and assist her when she was working with the diplomats there. And we also had our group, we just had a lot of fun. We were able to laugh a lot, and it was easy to communicate with one another. Okay. So a brief history of the George Marshall Center. So it is the official venue of the diplomatic embassy events. And this hotel was originally owned by Talleyrand, who was a French minister to Napoleon. He was an amazing diplomat for France, and he was able to survive during the four. I keep thinking the French word. I can't remember the English word. Regimes of French history without being killed, because he was there during the French Revolution. And so in this building, this is where the George Marshall Plan was, where the administration building was. And so now, whenever there's an event that promotes Franco-American relations, we organize the event and make sure that the ambassador has everything in order to do her job. So here are a couple of photos of the mansion. In the bottom right photo, you can see Ambassador Jane Hartley. She was the ambassador when I was there, but then quickly after, President Trump was elected as president, and so all the ambassadors had to leave. So she was there for a couple weeks during my internship. So the bottom circle is me, and then the top circle is Jane Hartley. So we took a big photo together as like workers at the embassy, and I meant to be just the intern in the back of the photo, but then everyone turned around and I was in the front. So I was like, oh, okay, great. Let the intern be in the front. So it's kind of a little funny story. So while I was at the embassy, I was able to meet Ambassador to the OECD, Daniel Johannes, and then Ambassador to the mission, Jane Hartley. They were both amazing ambassadors, and the diplomats that worked in the embassy loved them both. I especially loved Daniel Johannes because he, when you talked to him, he was the type of person that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He was an amazing person, and he did his job really well. So a couple of experiences that I had, I was able to go to a lot of events that the embassy hosted at the GMC. I was able to go to the ambassador residence on the left photo for Jane Hartley's departure, which is in a 18th century mansion in Paris as well. And then I was able to go to conferences and touch an expensive desk like this one. It cost $4 million. It was owned by the brother of Napoleon. And we were just able to do a lot of cool stuff that I wouldn't have been able to do if I didn't get my security clearance on time. A big part of my internship was dealing with the history and the culture of France and the Franco-American relations. So these kind of stuff, even though touching a desk sounds kind of silly, it was like a big deal. So, and it like made me really happy. So I loved it. And then, let's see. One of the challenges that I experienced while at the embassy was the first day you get a security briefing and you are told like the risks that are happening in the country and like what to look out for, pickpockets, stuff like that. And it intimidated me a little bit because during the time Paris was going through a little bit of a state of terror because of the terrorist attacks. So the first couple of days I was like a little bit afraid to leave my apartment. I just thought, I don't want to get into an attack or anything. But like the thing, I forget who it was, I think Chelsea, you said like when there was like something that happened in North Korea, you know, everyone back at home made it a big deal, but while you were there, it was like, eh. It was the same in Paris. When I was there was an attack at the Louvre. There was a man that tried to attack a soldier, but it was taken care of real easily. So stuff like that, after you live in a country for a little bit, you just become used to stuff like that, and you just continue to live, and you don't let stuff like that bother you. So during this internship, I was able to present on the Place de la Concorde. In French history, if you know about the French Revolution, you think about the guillotine. So the Place de la Concorde is where the guillotine was. But that's not what I mostly focused on. I focused on the Franco-American relations that are on the square and the design of the square. And so after I compiled that research during my internship, I presented it to about 40 diplomats, and then my notes were used and given to the front desk of the embassy. The front desk is like the chargé d'affaires, which is like the ambassador in charge when the ambassador is not appointed, and like the main like directors of the embassy. So my notes were able to go on and like go up that high in the embassy. So it was a really proud moment of mine, and I was really grateful that my bosses knew that I was there for a reason, and they knew that I wasn't there to get coffee, and they wanted me to learn something during this internship. And also in that photo on the left, those two diplomats there, they were in my Paris ward. And so it was really cool that even at church, like there's some people at the embassy that were there. So my first week in Paris, I thought, oh, I have friends in America. I don't need to make friends here, you know? I'm fine, you know? And then like the second week, I was like, I need friends. And so luckily, made friends in my ward, made friends at the embassy, was able to go on trips on the weekends and make the most of my internship. I suggest that when you go on your State Department internship, that you make an effort to make friends and be able to have fun when you're not working, because then you make friendships for life. So I really enjoyed my internship, and I hope that you guys have the chance to do something like I did as well.
Okay, my name is Miranda, and I was in Panama City this last summer. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I'm a junior here at BYU. I'm double majoring in Latin American Studies and Political Science. And how I kind of got interested in that, my freshman year I was studying international relations. I ended up going on a mission to Chile, where I was able to learn Spanish and really start to love the Latin American culture. And coming back, I decided to take more of the political science route and became really interested in the State Department. I'll go into it a little more later, but after my internship, I started to become really interested in everything dealing with like human rights, and right now I'm planning on going to law school in 2 years to study international human rights law. Okay, so with the application process, I just want to give you guys some tips with it. I did not start early enough. We'll just say that. I may have stayed up all night the night before it was due. But a huge thing is to start early and have people read over your application. I would say probably the most important part in a lot of ways is your personal statement. There's part of the application where I think you're supposed to write maybe a 500-word essay about yourself. When I got to my internship, my boss told me that every embassy's HR department works a little bit differently, but at mine, each of the section heads for the 5 different sections of the embassy were given the different personal statements from the people that had applied, and they just read the personal statements, and from there they decided if they wanted to look at the resumes and go on ahead. It might be different based on different embassies, but it's just so important that in that personal statement, don't be humble. Highlight the experiences you've had. A huge thing is if you've had international experience, whether it be a study abroad or a mission, really use that to your advantage. People were so amazed, everyone at the embassy I talked to, about a mission experience. Everyone is so amazed by the fact that someone will voluntarily go abroad for 1.5 to 2 years and immerse themselves in the culture. It's really an incredible thing. And also, specific advice that my boss gave me that I think could be helpful is typically when people see BYU students, it is people respect the university a lot, but sometimes what they can think is that a BYU student might not have experiences working in a diverse workplace. So he said every time that I'm applying for a job, every time I'm applying to whether it be law school or some other internship, make sure to highlight experience on your resume that show that you have had diverse experiences, that you've worked with diverse people, whether it be on your mission or through volunteer opportunities that you've had, just because you don't want people that have maybe a stereotypical view of Mormons or LDS people to let that get in their way. Okay, so a little bit about my internship. This picture is me with the 3 other interns from the summer and our ambassador. I was working in the political section of the embassy, so there were about 10 of us in the political section. And what I was in charge of is the first day I got to my internship, my boss sat me down and he said, I want you to completely redesign our biographical information system. So there was about 100 bio files on Panamanian political officials, and he wanted me to make that number so there were 500 bios. He also wanted me to be able to create a database with all that information and show a way to visually represent that through network visualization maps and make it a searchable database that could also be mobile. So I worked on that all summer, and then I also worked a lot with people some event planning, dealing with human rights issues, and then I also worked on, Mike Pence came to the embassy the last week I was there, and so while other people were really busy planning for that, I would help the officers if they had things they couldn't do. Just kind of echoing what other people were saying, I think a really amazing thing about State Department internships is they're really going to be substantive internships. I never once made coffee or made copies. Every office that you're in, usually an embassy has some sort of secretary, or sometimes they have summer hires, kids of foreign service officers that are there doing those things. And so it's an amazing opportunity to really get this political experience. I was able to learn so many new skills I didn't have before the summer, do challenging things. Just being able to be surrounded by really educated people that have amazing worldviews and amazing world experiences that have lived throughout the world is such an incredible opportunity. And just being able to get career advice all along the way. Okay, also, it was really amazing just to be in a foreign country. I was there, so I was saying there were 3 other interns. They actually provided us housing at our embassy. Not all embassies do, which was really incredible. One of the interns goes to Georgetown in Qatar. The other one went to Georgetown in DC, and one of them was getting her master's at the University of Denver. We were able to become really good friends and just do amazing things, go on a lot of hiking, canoe through the Panama Canal, beaches. One thing I would say, when I first applied for the internship, I was really nervous about the fact that it is unpaid, and you are going to have a lot of expenses. But I was able to apply for grants through BYU, and I was able to get my whole internship paid for. I paid no money out of pocket. So don't let that deter you from applying. A lot of embassies do provide housing. We had transportation to and from the embassy every day. It's totally possible. Okay, a couple difficulties. The picture's really dark. I'm sure if you guys do end up going on these internships, it's going to be such an incredible experience, but you'll be given these extremely difficult projects or do things that you've never had to do before, and you're going to be thrown into this situation, and you really are kind of like at the bottom of the social rung there, like you're an intern. But it was so amazing to be able to overcome those difficulties and really find it possible that I was able to develop these new skills that I didn't think I was going to. It was long hours. I'd never worked. We were there at the embassy every day from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. But being there, it was honestly one of the most rewarding, definitely the most rewarding summer of my life. And being able to fully decide like what I wanted to do with my future and decide what interested me. And I would definitely recommend that all of you apply.
Okay, I'll round out our little group. My name's Connor Kreutz, and I interned at the U.S. Consulate in Leipzig, Germany. Just about me, I'm a junior from Seattle. I'm majoring in international relations, minoring in business strategy. I went on my mission to Germany, so I speak German, and I've also tried to learn a little bit of French and Arabic. I stumble through those. I'd like to go into management consulting after I graduate, and that's actually something that changed over the summer through my internship experience. And I'll talk about that a little bit about that in a bit. But I applied because I knew I wanted to do something international. I knew I wanted to travel and go abroad and meet new people and speak different languages. And the Foreign Service sounded like the ideal job for that. And so I just applied because I wanted to check and make sure that the Foreign Service was totally for me, and I actually had a really enlightening experience on my internship. That kind of, my answer to that was the Foreign Service is something that I'd like to do, just not yet. And I can talk to you guys a little bit more about that, or if you have questions, come up afterwards, and I'd love to tell you more about why I think that for myself. So I worked at a consulate. What does a consulate do? So the U.S. mission to Germany is really big. There's an embassy in Berlin and then 5 other consulates throughout the country because the U.S. has a vested interest in the German economy. There are lots of Americans that live in Germany. And so the consulate's main job has 3 main jobs. The first is kind of to sell the United States. So it does a lot of PR in the region that we're responsible for. The second one is reporting. So we report on political events, economic events happening in the region that are of consequence to the United States. And the third is to provide American citizen services and sometimes also foreign national services. So that just means there's like consular officers in a consulate that help Americans in distress or can process visa applications, stuff like that. So this is in one of the meeting rooms in the consulate. The consulate had about 20 full-time employees. So it was a small team, which was cool for me because that meant I got to work across the cones and do a lot of different things in different areas. Everything from consular stuff to PR, so like public affairs, and also economic stuff, political stuff. We were doing these were journalism students, and we did kind of like a mock press conference. They like asked us questions about certain events, and then we like responded, and that was very interesting. Yeah, and then this is, of course, right when I got there, they took a picture of me. So some of the highlights of my experience were, this is kind of a dark picture, but this is me giving a presentation at a high school. The State Department has a program called Meet Us, and it serves to bring U.S. diplomats into schools and universities throughout the country that they're serving. And we basically gave lectures on American politics, American culture, government, studying in the United States. And that was one of the most rewarding things I did there. I did a few of those. Sometimes it was just me and another intern. We're put on a train and sent to a city. And we showed up, and we kind of were treated, all they knew was that we came from the embassy, and so we kind of were treated like diplomats, and it was really cool. Yeah, they gave us like wine, and of course we didn't drink it, but yeah, they were like treated us well, and that was really cool. And I met a lot of German youth through that who kind of talked to me about what they thought about America and their experiences. And that was a really, really cool experience. So if you apply to an embassy or you work in a consulate and you work in the public affairs section, then this is something that you could do pretty often. I also wrote a lot of speeches. So I served my mission in Germany, and that was really helpful and advantageous to me because I was told that I was hired specifically because I could speak German. If you work at an embassy, it may not be as important that you speak the language, but if you work at a consulate, everything you do is like with it's like really like boots on the ground, like you're talking with the people, you're talking with officials. And so I wrote a lot of speeches. So this is a speech at the 4th of July gala, and that's the Consul General. And then, can I point with this? Maybe. Okay, so that's the Consul General, and that is the Chargé d'Affaires. So that's like he's the acting ambassador in Germany right now because he's not an ambassador. And I wrote both their speeches for the 4th of July gala, and that was kind of cool, and I got to do that because I could speak German. So if you have a language skill, and you don't have to have one to apply, but if you do, apply somewhere where you can utilize that. I think I've talked with Miranda, and she also did it, and I know Susan did as well. So it's a very cool thing. I also got to travel, and that's another cool thing is when you're in these places, you kind of have a home base, so you can utilize the time to travel around. So this is me in Prague. It was about 3 hours from Leipzig, so I just drove there with some friends, and that was a really cool experience. Some other things that I got to do while I was there, a couple times, so for example, when the G20 summit happened this summer, the president and the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of State at one point they were all in Germany. When that happens, the entire country team, everybody who works in the German missions and consulates, they're all like prepping for that. And so the interns get to do really cool things that normally other people do. So I got to travel around with the Consul General in his armored car, visiting different events, kind of running point, because other members of the consulate were working on the presidential visit. That was something that was really cool, and to kind of see that happen. Other cool things we got to do, I did have to make coffee occasionally. That was embarrassing because I didn't know how to make it. But very, very rarely. And a lot of it was, we did a lot of reporting on the German elections, which happened 2 days ago. So we do lots of research, and actually some of my research was sent to the front office as well. It became part of a cable, which was sent back to Washington. So that's kind of something cool. And like when a lot of times when you work for the State Department, in your inbox, you can get like diplomatic cables from the region you're in. So I get all the ones from Europe. And like one day, like a cable came into my inbox, and it was like my research and like my wording of things that like was being sent to Washington and also sent to me, and it was really cool. So definitely, it's very substantive. It was challenging, just like Miranda said, and I think everyone's talked about kind of the challenges and the lessons they've learned. I learned that if you have like data processing skills or data visualization skills, those are really important. I spent so much time using Excel this summer and other like data programs, so it's definitely worth it to get those skills. Proofreading is also really important. One time, it was kind of a learning experience for me. I had a lot of documents to write, not a lot of time, and I just kind of like zoomed through them, and then I sent them off to a colleague, and like she responded to me in like the nicest German she could, like the least direct. She basically said like there were a lot of errors in this writing. You should proofread it, and that was like a totally humbling moment for me. And I nicely thanked her for her feedback, and every time after that, I was so much more conscious about proofreading because they expect to treat you like another foreign service officer, and they expect that you behave and that you work like a foreign service officer. So they have high expectations for you, but it's really rewarding. Personal relationships. I learned by observing other diplomats, and often high-level diplomats, that it's really important that you like take care of the personal relationships you have. There were a lot of people who had relationships with government officials that were willing to call on them when they needed help. And a lot of these foreign service officers really have a network all over the world because of their work. And I just saw how beneficial that was to them, and that was something that I will always remember. You do have to deal with the bureaucracy when you work for the State Department, and sometimes it is frustrating getting things approved and getting things cleared and getting materials that you need. So that is something that was a little bit, kind of turned me off a little bit from the Foreign Service. But at the same time, if you compare that to all the cool stuff that diplomats do, I could also see how it's definitely worth it. If you're like me and you have, I'm kind of a generalist. I do a lot of things, but I wouldn't consider myself like an expert in any one thing. But I have varied interests. The Foreign Service is very good for people like that, because the Foreign Service is looking for people who can turn around every 3 years and learn a whole new culture, a whole new government system, a whole new economy, and can operate successfully in a job like that. And so if that's you, then the Foreign Service might be a really good fit for you. And then also, I learned about the importance of person-to-person diplomacy. At least in Germany right now, the US-German relationship is a little precarious. And because we're all employees of the government, it's sometimes difficult to express everything that we feel about certain issues, because we ultimately are part of the executive branch of the government. So what's really important to building these relationships is the person-to-person diplomacy. And my boss would always remind me of that. I could tell sometimes he was frustrated with the way things were happening in the mission or in the State Department, but he would always reassure us that the most important thing for us to do is just to improve our friendship with the people around us in our consular district. And that was really cool. And so that is it for me. Maybe we'll spend 15 minutes or so, and we'll just get your questions. If you could come up to the mic and just state your name and then to ask your question, that would be great. And then we will break, and there's cookies in the back that you guys can have, and we'll enjoy the food. So if you have questions, come on up, and we'll take a few questions. Oh, and one other thing. If you're interested, if you want more info, this is the FSSO email address. And that's actually not the right email address. The right email address is fsso.byu.edu. Or, I'm going to check. Is this the right one? Okay, great. Well, as long as you got a response, that's the right one. Okay, good. Okay, yeah, and then if you have questions, just come up to the mic. Okay, good. That is the right one. So more info can be obtained at this email address.
Hi, my name's Abraham Hendricks. When you applied to your internships, which bureaus within the State Department did you apply to?
You guys we can all say.
Yeah, just
Okay.
yeah.
Just do into the mic so the video.
Yeah. So when I applied, I did obviously diplomatic security, but the second one that I did was INS, which is, I can't even remember what it stands for. It's like the International Narcotics Bureau, like basically doing trainings and things for different countries to help them basically stop drugs from coming to the U.S. So those were the two places that I selected.
And then if you want to do an embassy internship, like overseas, you pick, I think the option is some sort of like overseas internship program, and you can pick 2 countries to apply for. So I applied for Panama and Ecuador. So you kind of have to be smart too about the countries you apply for. Like think of how many people are applying to them. Some embassies are going to be much more competitive than others. But you can just choose 2 countries.
So I applied for Germany as my first choice and Morocco as my second choice. Germany gets a lot of applicants, so I was kind of concerned that I might not be like the first choice in Germany, and so I applied to Morocco because Morocco is obviously smaller. There's a consulate and an embassy there. I never heard back from Morocco though, and I did hear back from Germany. So.
Just put this over here. So I first applied for the Paris embassy because I really wanted to work in France, and then I applied for the Brussels embassy because that's where the EU is, and so I wanted that form of international government influence in my job, but I was really happy that I stayed with Paris because I've heard that the Belgian French is a little bit weird with their accent, so I was happy that my accent didn't get affected by that, but I was happy that I stayed with Paris.
Well, of course, I applied to Seoul because I spoke a little bit of Korean and knew the culture pretty well. And then I applied to Tonga for funsies. But I didn't ever hear anything from Tonga, so.
My name is Drew Wilson. So it sounded like you guys were working in like different departments in the consulates or embassies. Did you have any choice in that and like where you were working, or was that just by assignment?
I can take this.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
So it kind of depends. It depends on the way they do the hiring process. So the way that happened for me was I got an email, and I set up my first saying that they wanted to interview me, and I set up my first interview. And then I did a second interview, and then after my first interview, they called me back a little bit later and said we'd like to do a second interview. And during the second interview, they told me that I'd been selected to be an intern, and then they asked me questions about what I'd be interested in, and I told them I was interested in political and econ, and so I was placed in a consulate where political and econ are one section, and I could do both.
So in Panama, how it worked, and I think in a lot of other embassies, like the heads of each section, so like political, econ, consulate, they're going to get the different resumes or applications, and they decide who to interview. So I was actually only interviewed by the political section, so my section head directly decided to hire me, and so that's what I was offered. I'm pretty sure on the application you might be able to put your preferences for what section, but I don't really remember.
I think I put it in my
Maybe you can.
personal statement.
Maybe in your personal statement you can mention it if you have a certain preference.
Yeah. For me, I put it in my personal statement. I just said, I'm interested in consular work. And I didn't get any interviews. They just called me and said, you get it. So it just really depends on the embassy.
My experience is pretty much like the same as yours. I got a phone call from HR, and they said, oh, okay, so we've seen that on your resume that you speak French, so we're going to start our interview in French now. And I was like, okay. So we spoke in French, and so they wanted to gauge my French level, and that determined whether or not I would be a good fit for the GSO section that I was in, because in that section I had to speak with the locals and the security guards that are locals too. And so it's a little bit different, but normally in the interview process, that's where you hear where you'll be working. You might have a say, and so yeah,
Thank you.
depends.
Yeah, I didn't have any of that because I wasn't in an embassy, but I was with 10 agents. Some were agents and some were intelligence analysts, and yeah, since it was such kind of a small place, there wasn't any really selection. I was just kind of working with all of them on different ongoing projects and operations.
We love questions.
Hi, I'm Eric, and I was just wondering, with these internships, I'm kind of thinking about kind of what's next, so did they talk to you about, career opportunities or, going back and working, for them, or what was that like?
Kind of some of the things that I talked about again, rubbing shoulders with the right people is really great because I learned about a lot of best practices, application deadlines, all these different things that I would have not known had I not talked to some of these guys and seen, where they had come from, their backgrounds, the way they did their applications, and things. So I forgot your question.
Yeah, it was, what kind of career opportunities,
You found,
help
yeah.
you.
So just being able to talk with the people that are in the know is the best thing, I would say, in, being there. Yeah, I learned a lot of things.
So I would just say if you're interested in joining the Foreign Service, no matter who it is, what connections you have, you're going to have to take the Foreign Service test. So it is, like you said, it's so cool because you get to talk to these people and they'll share their tips and tricks. And like Chelsea was saying, she got a lot of help on like specific things for the test. And it's so important to make those connections for maybe once you're in the Foreign Service. They may not necessarily help you directly get a job, but just knowing the best practices is very helpful.
I think we can just take this out. Okay, I'd say, so I went in thinking I wanted to do Foreign Service, and I kind of had a revelation that like that wasn't for me. I actually met a management consultant who worked with the consulate and the embassy, and he told me about how he had been hired by the German government to essentially establish and expedite their refugee process, like their refugee like processing system. And that was really interesting to me, and that kind of sparked my interest in my current career path. And when I told that to my supervisor, he was all for it, and he was like, you know what, like, we'd love you in the Foreign Service, but if you found this, this is great, and let me tell you who I know who does this type of stuff. So I just found that the Foreign Service kind of family, it's the mentality, it's very family-oriented. It's great for families, it's also like an office family. And so people will also help you get where you're going, even if it's not the Foreign Service. But they've done so many things, they've met so many people, they have great ideas about careers.
So before I left, I made sure to get the head boss of the GSO's business card to make sure, and he when he gave it to me, he made sure to know that I knew, oh, my English is struggling today, that if I was ever in Paris, to message him and to be able to hear more about how he was able to enter the diplomatic service. And so also going to the Paris ward, I was able to meet a lot of members of the church that were also diplomats, and they were able to tell me their story and how they're able to still go to church and like live with the gospel while still like going abroad every couple of years to different service missions. So
I'm just going to echo what has been said, but because Foreign Service officers are generalists, they all come from different backgrounds. So like Connor was saying, I also had a roommate that was offered a job while she was doing her internship from just a company that was US based. But making those network connections, like Miranda said, is very important, because once you get past like the entry level posts, the only way to get into mid-level posts is you have to have a connection there. You have to know them, and they have to be like, yeah, I want you to come to my embassy and work with me. So those connections are very important. But yeah, just kind of, yes, amen.
My name is Megan Christensen, and so I was just wondering, like, pre-application, how would you recommend finding experience to set you apart from others?
I did what's called the virtual Foreign Service, and it was interesting because you apply to several different opportunities. There's many State Department, federal government organizations that will just post like, we need an intern to help us with this specific thing. And so you can apply like, I think 3, and it's either semester long or 2 semesters depending on who you're working with. But just that federal experience, and right now I'm actually doing one for HR in the Foreign Service, where they deal with posts and shipping and stuff that I did in my internship. But that looks really good. You could say Department of Education, and I did all these fancy things and stuff like that. So I think Connor had on his presentation USA Jobs. Go there. There's lots of student opportunities on there. I mean, it's not as much as actual jobs, but it's there. And then, make connections and just relevant job experience. I think somebody said that.
Yeah,
you did.
That's kind of my thing. Every internship that you do, take every opportunity, and again, score USA Jobs and make sure you create your own account, and that you also get emails, right? Creating pretty broad searches, because you want to know about all the different opportunities that are coming out, because some of them are very short notice, or they're only open for a short amount of time. So everything that I did made me more competitive for the next step. And then while you're here, whatever you do, whatever your major is, find something that increases that, or does that. So when I first started at BYU, I was a security guard at the MTC, which wasn't an amazing thing, but I rubbed shoulders with some law enforcement guys, and it helped me get to the next step, which I eventually worked here at the Kennedy Center in the international security office, which takes care of students abroad. And so I was doing a lot of analysis and things like that, which are, again, great for my resume. So always be looking for the next thing and be looking for those things that emphasize your experience even now while you're in college.
I just wanted to quickly say that on-campus jobs here at BYU, they also offer on-campus internships, and that was something that I did before my State Department internship. When I was a sophomore, I knew I needed to get something on my resume before I was a junior so that I could start working at the State Department. And so I just did this internship during one of my semesters here at BYU, where I worked for the LDS Church, for the LDS Publishing Department, and helped with translation guides, something that I worked in a group with. It was a class. It wasn't easy, but it was like an easy way to get an internship and something easy to put on my resume that gave me experience.
So I applied at the very beginning of my sophomore year for my internship last summer, and I just got back from my mission, and honestly, I didn't have a lot of experience, and so I think what I had to do is I had to write a cover letter that showed that I was responsible, that I was open-minded, that I was hardworking, and that I could, that I was fit for the job. And I just started working as a TA, and I was taking some research-based classes, and so I kind of had to use what I had to work for me. I hope that you have better experience than I did, but if you don't give up hope. You can still do this. So you focus on your strengths in your cover letter, and like Miranda said, the cover letter is a huge thing. So I would say, if you're applying for next summer, you don't have a lot of time to have experience because it's due in a week. So focus on the strengths that you have. Focus on the skills that you have. Focus on maybe international experience you've had in your cover letter. And if your resume isn't stellar, hopefully the cover letter and the way that you kind of sell yourself will make up for that. And it can. It did in my case.
Something that came to my mind, the Career Studio in the Wilkinson Center is amazing. They do walk-in resume reviews now, so you can go in and bring in your resume, and there are career mentors there that can help you organize your resume a lot better. And they do mock interviews. They teach you how to articulate your worth and be able to prepare you for actual interviews. So I recommend you going to the Wilk for that too.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Caleb. I don't know how much time we have exactly, but I was just wondering with the security clearance in particular, we've talked about some other parts of the application, but do you have any tips or hints on that, because it is due in a week, or any other parts of the application process in general that we haven't already touched on?
So you don't need to do your security clearance to apply for the internship. What'll happen is if you get offered the position. So I was interviewed, I got offered the position, I think probably like the first week of December for the next summer. And then, so they give you what's called a conditional offer. And because I was in the political section, I needed secret security clearance. So then how it works is, I think, what was it, like February maybe? You get like an email, and it's like, it gives you access to this account, and you have to do tons and tons and tons of kind of paperwork. It took me probably like 15, 20 hours. It's like every international contact, international travel, if you've served a mission, like it's gonna take a lot of time. But with that, I would just recommend get it in as soon as possible. I turned mine in about 2 weeks before the due date, and I was able to get it with time for my internship, to be able to buy my plane ticket, to be able to make my plans. If you procrastinate that to like the last day, you're gonna be put at the bottom of a pile. And one of the girls in my internship, she didn't get her security clearance till like a week before she was supposed to go, and ended up paying a ton of money for plane flights. So I would just say do it as soon as possible. Know that it's gonna take a lot of time, but do it as soon as possible if you do get offered the internship.
Did you guys have to turn in your fingerprints?
Yeah, fingerprinting.
Yeah. So something you can do in the meantime, there's like usually a 6-week kind of break in between like your conditional offer and then when the security clearance opens. So what I did was I made sure I got my fingerprints taken care of as soon as possible. You can do it with BYU Police. That's just an additional paperwork that you have to turn in. And so once that was done, I sent that in to the security clearance office in DC so that they already had it on record. And then once I turned in my security clearance, it was just like all ready to go. So.
I don't know if this happened for you, but I actually had a private investigator come out and meet with me.
Yeah.
So it's intense. Get it done early.
And just to clarify, this is in February, not in like the next week, correct?
This
Like
is
after you've been
after
accepted.
you applied.
And you've been offered a job.
Yeah.
I have one more thing to say. So I served my mission in Germany, and I went back to Germany. And I had a lower level security clearance than Miranda did, but mine took way longer because I lived in the country for an extended amount of time. So just like think about that when you're applying, and just turn it in. Like it's still possible to do, but just turn it in as soon as possible. Like the advice I got was like, when it opens up, like take every second you can to fill out your clearance so you can turn it in just a couple days later, and that'll get you on the first batch of applicants, and that will make all the difference.
I have one more comment. I don't know if your HR department did this, but my representative, she sent me a copy of like an older version of the security clearance, and so I knew what type of questions they were going to ask. So I just wrote down my answers, and so once it came out like October 1st, and I had it all ready to go, and I sent everything by October 3rd. So I made sure that everything was ready to go as soon as possible. So hopefully your HR department will be that nice, but sometimes they won't.
And this is for a winter internship, right?
Yeah, it's technically called spring, but it was from January to April, so.
And then for those of you who haven't done one of these before, it's really basic. It's not like this big scary thing. It's going to go back typically probably 7 years, because you're probably not going to go higher than secret. It's where you've worked, people that have known you, who you've lived with, names, addresses, phone numbers, that basic information. But it goes back 7 years, so some of you that's going to be back to like high school, right? So just having some of that information prepared beforehand, right? Knowing the address of the place that you worked 5-6 years ago is not going to be, necessarily on the top of your mind. So just having that stuff ready can help you fill it out a lot quicker.
Mission addresses. Where
Yes.
you live, the people you talk to on your mission.
That was really hard. Real quick, just a warning. So I switched over to management because they didn't have any interns because they couldn't get through all the security clearances fast enough. They didn't have enough officers to get through check everyone's credentials, and that's why they didn't have interns. So get it done.
Okay, I think we'll stop now. We invite you to go and eat some cookies. There's a lot of cookies there. They're chip cookies and they're good, so eat them. And if you have more questions, I think most of us can stay for a little bit, and we'd be happy to talk to you more about our experiences in the application.